Thank you all so much for being here. So, to kick this off, we are doing a second installment of Connecting the Dots. Connecting the Dots is our digital tools civic engagement theme webinar. We wanted to make sure that we're kind of like starting from scratch. We have a great opportunity with 2025 being like a build year. So, for those of you who attended our Connecting the Dots Part 1 webinar, we focused on civic engagement. And this time around, we'll focus on how to incorporate data tools into your voter engagement plan. So, all of the things that we talked about. For those of you who missed that webinar, you can see it on our YouTube channel, and you can look through our e-blast because we include it in there as well. So the question that we always get asked as we kick this off is this webinar being recorded? Yes, yes, yes. We absolutely record all of our webinars, and we will share this with you. At the end of this webinar, you'll also be able to use a QR code to sign up to become a community partner. And our 2025 recruitment has begun, so we'll talk more about what that looks like for this year, and make sure you have all of the information. Again, this is a fun webinar that we hope you will engage with us. So please feel free to drop your Q&A, your questions into the Q&A box. I circled it there for you so you can see it in Zoom. Don't drop your questions into the chat. Just drop them into the Q&A box, and Travis from our team will raise them up. You also have a closed caption option in Zoom, and then you have the reaction buttons. So if there's anything that you hear that you enjoy, or resonates with you, please drop those. And let's get into who we are and what we do. So many of you already know us because, again, lots of you are long-term partners with us. But NVRD, National Voter Registration Day, is managed by Nonprofit Vote, which is the leading provider of nonpartisan voter education resources. You can check out our biennial report to learn about the work that we've done over the past few years. Again, this webinar is being shared, the link will be shared with you, so you'll have access to the link. But our mission is to make sure that we are equipping our nation's nonprofits with all of the tools and resources that you need to engage your communities. We've been doing this for many years, and we're happy to continue doing this work, especially in the years where we need it the most. Here's a little bit about the history of National Voter Registration Day, which, can you believe it, we're now in the 13th year. We are entirely nonpartisan and bipartisan. We like to say that we're one of the few remaining safe spaces for those reasons. Last year, we had the huge federal election where 820,000 people registered or updated their registration because of you guys. So we love, love, love our partners. You guys are the fighting force behind this work. Thank you for all the hearts coming through in the chat. You guys are the reason that we were able to touch so many people last year. 1 in every 120 eligible voters nationwide were touched last year. So thank you so much, 1 in 120. Thousands of diverse partners, which are you guys, participate every single year to get the tools to make sure that you can do voter registration drives in your community. And we thank you, thank you, thank you so much. Again, this holiday is nonpartisan and bipartisan. We are supported by the National Association of Secretaries of State. Hello to the Secretaries of State that are here. The National Association of State Election Directors, the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, and the National Association of Election Officials. And the 6 rules for becoming an NVRD partner, very easy, very simple. First and foremost, have fun, and that's also the last rule, but be nonpartisan. Make sure to keep this work completely about voter engagement, voter registration. As tough as that can be, it's very important to remain nonpartisan, as well as being inclusive, being informed about your state's voter registration laws, staying non-transactional, which goes hand in hand with being nonpartisan, and be vote ready. So that means use all the resources that are available to you to make sure you are educated, to make sure that you feel confident in spreading the information, and to make sure that you can also train other people to do the same. And of course, have fun. So whether it's a voter registration drive, or it's a pizza party, or if it's like a community block party, have fun with it. And that's how you can really become a trusted voice in your community. So now let's get into why you are here. So many of you here. We have 200 people here. Thank you guys so much. We have you guys here to learn about how data can be helpful in building your voter engagement plan. So in this section, we will cover how data can be used, what tools are available, and how you can use the tools in each year of your voter engagement plan. So 2025 through 2028 is the 4-year stretch that we're looking at. Then for some partner perspective, we have a special guest who is Grant Wiles. He is from NextGen America, and he is going to talk specifically about how NextGen America uses data to reach youth and college students and to give you some ideas about how you can use data to target your own community. So again, this webinar is being recorded. You will receive a copy of this presentation. So take notes, but also just kind of listen in because you'll have the presentation at your disposal. So let's revisit what we talked about first in our last webinar. So connecting the dots part 1 was about civic education and kind of establishing the framework. In that webinar, we addressed a very critical issue that is unfortunately prevalent in American culture, which is the widespread lack of civic engagement, civic education. Many voters really don't have a clear understanding of how government works or how these elections are connected each year. So this is where our role as civic educators begins. Having voters with a general knowledge and understanding of how the political system works, commonly referred to as civics, it enhances and improves the functioning of our system every day. We know that diminishing civics knowledge has also coincided with declining public engagement and trust in our overall political system. So you can see from the stats here that civic education is very low. It's the highest for folks that are coming out of high school, but as we get older, unfortunately, some of that information starts to slip away from us. So here's a great opportunity to kind of let's start from scratch. This is a great year to do so since we have a lot of local elections happening, and then we can kind of build towards 2028 again. So now let's talk data. What role does data play in civic engagement and education? Data is not just helpful, it's foundational to effective civic outreach. It allows organizations to work smarter, not harder. And most importantly, we incorporate data into our plans. When we do so, we're not just guessing, we're being strategic. And this year, we absolutely need it. So what you can see from here, from the stats, is that it actually works. According to Circle, text messages based on voter file targeting can increase turnout by 1 to 2 percentage points. And personalized emails yield click-through rates 2.5 times higher than non-targeted ones. So those may seem like pennies, but in the data world, that's pretty significant. And organizations that use audience insights are 60% more effective in registration to turnout conversion. So data has lots and lots of perks. There's many, many reasons to use it. Let's talk about the practical uses of data in this work in particular. There are so many uses for data in general, but when we talk about the voter engagement space, there can be uses from geo-targeting to segmenting audiences and personalizing messages. Those are usually the most common. The most notable of these uses would also be in helping build a deeper understanding of your community and audience. So incorporating data into your plan can help you tailor your communications, use tones that resonate with the community, and expand your understanding of the needs of the audience. So not only is data going to help you tell more of a story about who your community is, it's going to help you also be able to relate to them more and to really understand what it is that they're facing and how to bridge the gap for voter engagement with them. So in this section, we're going to talk more about your voter engagement plan and how to incorporate data. In our last webinar, we reviewed the framework for our voter engagement plans from 2025 through 2028. So now let's talk about how data can be incorporated into the plans for each of those years so that you can strengthen your reach and results. 6 key questions to ask, and this may remind you of being back in elementary school: who, what, when, where, why, and how. I remember learning that in maybe like fourth grade, and it was such a big part of the curriculum. But it really does carry through, especially when it comes to telling a story. So, whether this is your first time using data and you're a novice, or you're a pro and maybe you call yourself a data nerd, it's important to start with the basics to make sure you understand the most pivotal questions and make sure that they're being asked. These questions will help to ensure your data plan is purposeful and actionable. So, what I've included here are just some of the starting questions to help you understand what is the story or what is it that you're trying to learn from the data. And in a few slides, again, we have our guest speaker, Grant, who will do a deep dive into how NextGen uses data to reach college voters and youth voters. But I thought we could do a very quick thought exercise of another community and how you'd use data. So an example of this could be if you work in a community with, let's say, predominantly Latino voters, but in your most recent election, you learned that turnout dropped by 30%, which is pretty significant. One key consideration is, of course, the political climate and the uncertainty that this particular community may be facing. So it's very important to remember to not assume that the issues that the community was experiencing in the last election are the same issues as now. Lots has changed. So with that in mind, what are the questions that we should ask to inform the data? Again, let's go back to the six questions: who, what, when, where, why, now. And these are the kind of framework questions that can help us get on the right track with what it is that we need to know. Again, what is the problem that we are trying to solve? Starting with who. Who is the voter? Who did not vote in the election? What were the specific age groups, genders, and educational levels? So what were the identifiers, right? For what is the problem that we want to solve? Again, why are we doing this work? What are the issues that impact this community? And also, how have the issues changed? When was the last time that they voted? So that's really important because they may not know about the landscape, or maybe their voter registration has changed and there's a need for an update. Where does the community go for voting information? Who is the trusted source? Why does voting matter to this specific community? And then lastly, how many community members are eligible but not registered? And how do we uncover barriers, motivators, and communication preferences? So again, these are just some ideas to get you thinking. And now we can talk a little bit about what data tools are actually available. There's a ton of tools that you can use from free to paid. We have included a few here. You may be using some tools already. We've also included this in the glossary so you can get a better sense of what each of these tools does, and you can figure out based on your budget and how dedicated you are to this work, what will work for you. But we wanted to just make sure that we can show you how many are available, and this is just a few. And now we will kind of talk about the next 4 years. So for those of you who attended the last webinar where we kind of built our voter engagement plans around the 4-year cycle, what we focused on very importantly was making sure that we identified the themes of each of those 4 years. So in year 1, we talk about building the foundation. We focus on making sure that we can establish a framework for civic education in 2025. And now we'll talk about how for each of these years, how data plays a role. So in 2025, many people think this is a quiet election year since it's the year following the federal elections. They could not be more wrong. We actually have about 100,000 open seats up for election all across the country this year. So that's pretty significant. Local elections are where trust is built and impact is most tangible. So in 2025, we continue to lay the foundation for long-term engagement by helping communities realize their power in local races. So we're calling this the Build Year. And let's look at how we incorporate data collection and listening into this Build Year. So if we use data to build the framework, to understand community, we can think about what tools are available. So surveys, there's census data that can help us identify the underserved areas. We can also use free tools that help monitor engagement and identify barriers. This groundwork research will help us to set the foundation for the next 3 years when we shift gears to education and then mobilizing. So now, as we move into year two, 2026, we're gearing up for the midterm elections, which are about engagement and momentum. If we engage voters now through state level issues, we can grow their interests and investment in the broader democratic process. So 2026 is our engage year. In year two, we continue with strategy expansion. So using the research that we have from year one, we can now introduce audience segmentation and refined outreach. With a better understanding of who the community is, now we can start to tailor messaging to demographics, issues, and geography. As an example, we can use CRMs and voter file tools to sharpen that targeting. You can also continue to incorporate surveys into your engagement strategy to continue to measure the needs of the community. And this way you maximize the effectiveness of your plan and to make sure that it remains relevant. Again, let's not assume that one election mirrors the next. The issues have changed, the concerns have changed drastically. So we want to make sure that we stay on top of that as the trusted voices within our communities. Take advantage of the heightened engagement in the midterm elections that we'll be experiencing and renewed interest from your community as well. This is the year that people turn out. And 2027 is our prepare year. So it's technically the quietest election year, but it's also our best chance to deepen civic engagement, build community relationships, and educate before the big rush of 2028. So in year three, we continue to deepen engagement by maintaining engagement using educational tools. So this can look like surveys, but it can also look like hosting workshops, distributing newsletters, and tracking engagement. What's really key in 2027 is identifying who's dropping off and re-engage them as early as possible as we lead up to the federal elections, where historically we have the highest engagement and turnout. So this is a way to, a good year to have like a safety net of making sure that you're monitoring the community very closely. And then lastly, 2028, which is our drive year. This is the year that we go big, of course, right? Because federal elections draw attention, and we as community partners and local organizations can use that spotlight to turn out voters at every level, especially for those down ballot races that often get overlooked. So in year four, from a data perspective, we continue with the activation strategy, and 2028 is a huge data year. So you can do things like applying A/B testing and predictive modeling. You can use accumulated data for smart layered outreach. These tools are a little bit more advanced, but this is assuming that you may have been using data across your voter engagement plan for the past 3 years. If budget or experience with using these types of data tools may prohibit you from using these, that's okay. Just continue to use the tools that work for you. But in 2028, you do have an opportunity to dive into a little bit more of an advanced model. And then lastly, now that we've covered all 4 of these years and how data can play roles, I wanted to also touch on AI and ChatGPT. So for many of you that use these platforms, I just wanted to call out that there are many ways that you can use AI to help generate strategies, to segment audiences, and analyze data. Of course, ChatGPT, you have to feed it the information. It may not be totally accurate, but it will get you on track with at least providing like sample prompts. These sample prompts can demonstrate how to apply AI to this voter engagement strategy. AI tools can be user-friendly and scalable, so just make sure that you're being very specific in your prompts so that you get the best results. Awesome. And now I'm so excited to introduce Grant Wiles. as our guest speaker for today. Grant is from NextGen America. He is a wonderful partner, and NextGen America has actually been a very long-term partner of NVRD. It's always great to hear about the innovative ideas that NextGen brings forth in reaching youth and college students. So I'm super excited to hear from Grant. And Grant, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Yeah, just the way we'll structure this is sort of going over what NextGen does at the outset, and then I'll go into some examples of how we use data that'll hopefully be helpful for y'all. So just to kick it off, our target audience is people who are aged 18 to 29. It is obviously a demographic that is often overlooked. It's largely Gen Z and people of color. Last cycle in 2024, 3 out of 4 of our demographic that we registered were first-time voters. 3 out of 5 were new registrants since the midterm elections in 2022. And the vast majority are non-white. Um, so just to give a little background of what NextGen is. So what we're really focused on, just given how young people are occupying a lot of different digital spaces nowadays, is making sure we're reaching people where they're at. So not only are we in person on college campuses across several states, we're present online in community hubs. We really specialize in culturally relevant outreach. As I was talking to Cheyenne before the webinar, folks that are, in the 18-29 demographic sort of view Facebook more like a phone book and sort of a place to reconnect and stay in touch with folks long term rather than a place where they spend time. Whereas in the past, that was like an emerging social media tool that was worth a lot of investment for young voter outreach. Um, so we'll talk to folks in high schools, DMVs, restaurants, local events, but also have a robust online presence as well. And last cycle, we had 250 field organizers across 8 states. We registered about 130,000 people to vote, pledged around 200,000, and that was powered by a lot of grassroots organizing, volunteering, distributed organizing, and digital organizing. Um, which I can talk to briefly. And just in terms of the scale, we sent about 24 million texts, called about 3 million folks last year. We made about 1.2 million contact attempts on NVRD alone. And I'll be talking a little bit into our NVRD strategy and just how to make that data driven in just a bit. But it was really powered by our distributed organizing team and the volunteers that were helping us with that. So just to give like a brief overview, there's so much to cover on this, and this question is really hard to answer, especially within a single slide on a webinar. But the best way I could think of to describe political data is using technology to solve problems and target resources. So that can mean, from a targeting angle, as Cheyenne was mentioning, using it for turnout purposes, leveraging the voter file, which is the registry of everyone who's registered in that state, to identify who is a turnout target based on past election history or predictive modeling, things that you can acquire through vendors like the one Cheyenne mentioned, like Target Smart. It involves polling and leveraging polling to understand, we're about to conduct a poll, so this is very top of mind, but to understand what are the motivators for people to vote, what issues motivate people, what are the barriers people identify to voting. Those are things that you can incorporate into your strategy and understand, which demographics they feel particularly challenged by certain barriers or motivated by certain issues, and leverage that in your targeting and outreach. It encompasses things like data visualization, which I'll give an example of in a bit, about how you can use data visualization to target your efforts. And then also, as Shine mentioned, automation and AI. I'll actually give an example of an AI tool that we built at NextGen to help engage young voters. But there's so much fertile ground here. In addition to sort of the prompting and helping you make your job better, AI is really good at interpreting things and using that in different ways. So there's applications that we can build that make it easier for folks to engage civically. So I'll give an example of that as well. So it's just starting first at the top here, like how to be data driven with voter registration. Folks that work in political tech like me are used to working with the voter file, which is the registry of folks who are registered in a given state, or when it combined nationally. But the issue with using that for voter registration is unregistered voters aren't on the voter file. So how can you target them? So there are some vendors like TargetSmart who will sell, databases of folks that are unregistered based on consumer data, and unfortunately, those aren't always the best resources. If you or your organization have made calls into those or texted those folks, you'll probably have learned that those aren't the most fruitful and definitely not a good volunteer experience. So I think the one thing I want to implore folks on this call to think about is how do you be creative with using data that is available to target what you want to accomplish. So for us, for anyone who's done campus voter registration, the conversation is very often, are you registered to vote? And then someone will say yes or no, and often yes. And then you'll say at your current address. So the thing that we tried to do last year and the year before on NVRD in particular, because it was such a day of mobilization, was replicating that conversation that we have on campus. So we used our database of Target Smart addresses, which is modeled and based on a number of different factors that Target Smart themselves assemble, and found where that differed from folks' voter file address. So we would text people with an address discrepancy and say, are you sure you're registered to vote at your current address? And that allowed us to use the voter file to actually target folks for a re-registration campaign. So that's an example of one thing you can do to use data to be creative and to target voter registration efforts. But it takes really sitting down and thinking how to approach that problem, which everyone will have a different solution for. The next slide is a good example of how to use data visualization. So we created a heat map that mapped out youth registration density in Virginia. We're focused a lot on Virginia in 2025 here as there's a governor's race, but it allows us to see where young folks are concentrated. So this is the heat map of 18 to 29-year-olds who are registered. And now we can know which areas make sense for things like geofence digital ads, to target folks on voter registration, to mobilize them when it's time to vote, to really hone your resources, because otherwise you might just sort of spend it in a more blanket fashion. But this is an example of how data visualization itself can help you be more data driven in your program. The next thing I wanted to talk about was Voti, which, as you can see by my headset, I'm kind of a nerd. So was interested in combining the political world and the gaming and entertainment world. A lot of young folks spend their time on Discord and on Twitch. And folks here may or may not be familiar with these platforms, but they are emergent. They're here to stay, and they grew a lot during COVID, especially. So we built an application that does four main functions, that helps folks on Discord register to vote. It will send them a message when it's time to vote or during key election dates. It'll help them find their polling place. And it'll also just answer miscellaneous questions about the voting process. So if someone asks, and this is why AI is particularly good for something like this, because we can build a database of state election websites. And if someone asks, am I eligible to vote? You can have the AI reference, and send people to their official resources when they ask a hard question, rather than just sort of making things up, which AI is very good at doing. But just wanted to give you all an example of how you can use AI in ways that are more programmatic. And you all can feel free to use Voti. We're going to make it a web application soon where you can send your folks to the bot, and we're happy to partner with y'all and share the backend data that we get from the bot, if y'all are interested. So definitely feel free to reach out. But just wanted to give an example of a way that you can use technology to think about where your audience is, and find a way to engage with them. And then the final piece I want to talk about was how we use Rock the Vote, which is our voter registration tool. Cheyenne mentioned vote.org, a similar tool that does, helps with online voter registration. It works really well, especially given the varying rules states have. For example, Texas, like you can't do online voter registration, but you can, um, pre-fill a mail application, and Rock the Vote will send them that application very, very quickly upon filling out a form. So then they can mail that in, and I think it's pre-posted as well. So there's a lot of ways that these tools can get around and make it easier for folks to register, even if the states themselves aren't facilitating that very well. And just wanted to briefly touch on like how NextGen, uses these things called UTM codes, which if you've ever looked at a URL that has a bunch of stuff added to the end of it, it's usually a UTM code, which is added to the end of a URL that lets folks look at the back end data and understand where things came from. So for us, that manifests through an example would be our organizers, have QR codes that they're registering folks digitally in person sometimes, and that will get attributed to a specific organizer when somebody registers through their link. So it's happening in the field, but it's also happening when we post on Instagram and post a registration link. Then we'll know on our end that somebody came from Instagram, somebody came from the field, somebody came from a distributed text or call, or a social media post. And the reason I bring this up is because it gets our organization thinking a lot about where folks register from, and lets us look at and do analysis on the turnout rate of people that come through various mediums, the voter file match rate, and also the cost per registration. So if you're trying to run a data-driven registration program, a really good first step is understanding where your folks are registering from. And tools like Rock the Vote, vote.org, any sort of online tools can help you understand the sourcing so you can then refine your programs further. So we do that for all of our different methods. So there's a lot of different things sort of I covered here, but I was hoping to just give you all some examples of how you can be creative with data, specifically with the audience that you're interested in, if it's narrow or if it's broad, and how you can use some of the concrete data sources to guide that strategy. Um,
Grant, you're the best. Thank you so much for being here. And as a self professed data nerd, I was just so excited to have you guys on because NextGen does such cool innovation, as you saw with the Vote E tool. I can't wait to use that tool, by the way. They do such good tech innovation, and you can really see how they take data and use it to their advantages. So I could see from the reactions in the chat, people definitely resonate with that. And I'm just so grateful for your time. Thank you, Grant, for being here. If you have questions for Grant, please drop them into the Q&A box. We will raise up a few that are similar so that we can make sure that those are addressed. There's already a couple of the questions in there about where do we get started if we're brand new to data. So we'll definitely answer that in the next few minutes. So thank you, Grant. And what we've included here in this section is just our resources that we discussed over the past few slides. So just a glossary of some of those data tools that now have like a little description and whether or not they're paid or free or both. Again, you guys will have access to this, so don't feel rushed or like you have to write this down. You will have access to the presentation through the recording. And we will get into the Q&A in just one second. I want to very quickly go to what's next for NVRD, and then we'll circle back. I know there's a lot of questions about data because a lot of you have not used data before, and you should not feel ashamed about that. Wherever you are in your experience, we want to allow a few extra minutes. So let's talk about what's next before we go into the Q&A, and that'll give you guys an opportunity to drop some questions into the Q&A box. So you can be one of the first to sign up as a community partner for this year. You have the QR code right here on your screen. Again, if you have signed up in the past, we're so excited to invite you back. Thank you so much for partnering with us. It's extremely important. As a community partner, you can place an order at no cost to you for a package of posters and stickers to display at your National Voter Registration Day event. National Voter Registration Day is September 16th this year. We're super excited about it. Coming soon, we have toolkits and fact sheets and resources, all of the plug and play needs to make your voter registration event seamless. So we are working diligently on that right now to have for you in advance of the big day. Our goals for this year are to sign on lots of partners. We know that there's 100,000 elections happening across the country, so we're hoping to sign on about 2,800 community partners, and we want to register 250,000 new voters on September 16th. So thank you again to our community partners for being there and helping us meet those goals. And then very quickly, just some key dates coming up. You may have seen if you're on the listserv that we have a webinar coming up on May 28th. All 2025 politics is local. So that is a really excited one. And that one will talk about all of the elections that are happening across the country this year. We will do our Gearing Up for the Civic Holidays webinar, as well as our community partner webinars, which are going to help you plan for your NVRD events, both from a communications perspective and then from an actual logistics perspective. And then we have September 16th as National Voter Registration Day. So if you need to contact us, please feel free. This is our email, info@nationalvoterregistrationday.org. And there's the QR code once again to sign up so that you can receive the information. So now let's do our Q&A. Grant, thank you for sticking around. I know you guys have tons of questions about data, and we wanted to allow a few extra minutes so that we can be sure to answer them. Data is a really, really important part of your voter engagement plans, especially when we're talking about the 4-year cycle. We're talking about how to help voters connect their everyday issues to voting, which is never an easy conversation to have, but there are the tools that can help you make the conversation a little bit easier. So we want to make sure that this is really helpful to you. So let us take a look at the Q&A and drop in any questions that you have. Okay, so there's quite a few questions in here. Let's start with, which are the best tools, free or paid, to use if you are just starting out with data tools? So I think both Grant and I can probably answer that question. Grant is the expert here, but from what I've used and what I've seen, if you are brand new to this work and maybe you don't have much budget for it, or you do, you can always start out with surveys. Surveys are a great way to understand your community, to get a little bit of a better sense of what language your community speaks, what tones will most resonate with them, what communications messaging, but then also what are their greater issues. So we included a few in those resources. You can do SurveyMonkey, you can do Google Analytics, but start with surveys because that may give you a sense of like, where is the issue? Again, you want to go back to the 6 questions, right? What problem are we trying to solve? And maybe you can use the survey data as a way to get a better understanding of what to do next. Grant, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think there's so many things that come to mind here in terms of like starting out with data tools. Our team uses for data visualization, we use a lot of Looker, which is a free tool that was acquired by Google a few years ago. So there's a lot of integrations that Looker has with Google BigQuery. But I think to give you like a specific tool, if you look into Reach, it's a really good grassroots organizing application that we're really exploring for next year. Yes, I said Looker. Also, I can't type in the chat for some reason, so hopefully we can talk through each other. But I would look into Reach. The website's reach.vote. I would look into using Looker for free data visualization. NextGen, we use a lot of NGP Van, which folks who have worked, on campaigns before have probably used at some point or another, but is really useful for, voter registration, turnout campaigns, as well as, sort of persuasion stuff.
Awesome. As far as digital outreach for voter registration drives, if we're not retargeting young voters to clean a list at, say, a college campus, how would we know who is not registered at all? And which platforms are recommended to get this data? Since we're talking about college campuses in this one, Grant, do you want to take it?
Yeah, this sort of brings to mind something that I think is really useful. And so one example is our field program had an 85% voter file match rate last year, which is exceptionally high in terms of the people that we registered and put into a list, and then found out later after we got voter files back post-election who actually ended up on the voter file. Our match rate was 85, which was really enabled by our audit process that I think is probably useful to talk about for folks here that, when we register someone to vote, you have their information, and then having an intermediary step to make sure that those forms are like there's no typos or think people didn't forget to fill things out. So just making sure that you go and fix those problems before on the front end. And there are a lot of tools that help with this. There's one that is called Blocks that does a really good job of, you know, analyzing the effectiveness of different voter registration sites, and the time allocated, but also very useful for auditing the voter registration process. So I'd look into something like Blocks for auditing. But we are retargeting young voters. I mean, the way NextGen, the size of the youth electorate in a given state is not relatively small to the point where we can contact them multiple times without problem. The issue is the quality of that contact. So we're making sure that, we're texting people, we're calling people, we're putting ads on their campus, we are, visible on the campus, and then we're also in person doing events, talking to folks, and trying to mesh all of that together to do our best to get folks to register. Because as Cheyenne noted, we have a civic education and engagement problem in this country, and we have to do all of these methods and surround the voters and prospective voters with opportunities to become involved. Otherwise, they won't. So we really leave no stone unturned. Um, and that, definitely includes data, because if you're leaving that out of the equation, you're only talking to folks in person, maybe, you're not reaching them digitally, then, the chances are lower that you're going to get that person motivated to vote or engaged. Yes, that is Blocks.
Grant, thank you for emphasizing that the touch points that are needed. It doesn't stop at one, right? We know, especially the better that you know your community, the more you'll have an understanding of how many touch points it takes. With youth voters, we do know that the number of touch points is even higher because of their communication preferences, their need for visibility, and their need for trusted voices. So don't underestimate the importance of those touch points. Awesome. And great question. So the next question that we'll raise up is, what would be the best way to gather unregistered citizens of voting age in an area that provides a breakdown of race and gender data? That is an awesome question. I think the best answer there is the census data. The census data is going to give you that background data from the past few years of a little bit more detail than you may actually have access to otherwise of who these voters are and where they exist. So you'll be able to see those demographics. You'll be able to build some presentations from that so that that can inform your next parts of the data or the next pieces of data that you want to look into. But that, I would say, is probably the most foundational tool to get you started. Grant, would you agree with that?
Yeah, it makes me think of a tool or a service that Blue Labs provided in the past. If y'all are familiar with them, you can check them out, their website. And just to answer, I believe it was Stephanie's question, we use a service called Flight Desk to put posters and stuff on campus. But the census data is actually the most exceptional resource for this exact question, because if you do the correct analysis of it, you're able to actually look on a precinct level. You can model the number of unregistered voters by demographic, which is incredible because you could look at a county and see, this is where the highest concentration of unregistered voters by each different demographic are, and target your in-person outreach, your digital outreach based on that, which is something that I've been always pushing for organizations to leverage, because the census data set is, I think, just wildly underutilized by organizations, and folks don't even know this exists. So if you're interested in that, definitely check out the CVAP information that's on the census site and see how it relates to precincts and counties, and then try plotting it in Looker.
Awesome. Yeah. The census tool as a tool in general is just entirely too underutilized. It answers a lot of the questions that you may have, or it'll put you on track to find the answers to the questions that you need. So it's definitely a good starting point. Folks are also, before I continue, folks are in the chat asking how do we access Looker, the Looker tool. So maybe if you want to just repeat that.
Yeah, I think if you just Google it, it'll come up really easily, but it's probably either called Looker or Google Data Visualization Studio. And you can do a lot with it.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Awesome. These questions are great. So I hope they are answering them for you. I know there's a lot of questions about data, especially just where to start. So don't feel like any question is dumb at all. Um, Question number 4 is, how do we reach out to voters for whom English is a second language? Our local elections do not have ballots in any other language other than English. How do we advocate for election materials in other languages in our towns? That is a great question, and thank you so much for raising that up because we know the importance of language. So, if there's any opportunity to partner with trusted resources who can do translations, maybe local organizations, community groups, maybe even folks who just speak another language and are able to do the translating, you should do that. You should, if you're able to, do the translations on your own and continue to advocate for the local elections office to provide that. Unfortunately, they may or may not. We can't speak to that since that is specific to the office, but you can do your best to do the translations to make those materials available to folks. That could be through palm cards, that could be through digital resources. But if you recognize that language is a really big barrier in making sure that these folks have the information, then see what you can do to translate that and maybe problem solve in that area. There's also tools online that will translate for you, but you'll probably just want to have those tools QC'd to make sure that they are speaking the right language, right? So yes, that would be my best suggestion. Question number 5, is there a program that can show a map of participation of eligible citizens not registered to vote so that we can target by geographical location? Grant, do you know of any maps that show participation?
I don't, I mean, participation, is really looking at turnout, right? So you could look at election results, like the one the New York Times assembles on a precinct level. That's pretty useful. That's one that we've been looking at and seeing, when we're comparing that from 2024 to 2020, what are the turnout differences? Where is turnout increasing or declining? Um, but that, in terms of like registration, is sort of what I was alluding to before on the census data. I don't know if there's a publicly available resource, but the data does exist. And I think what I'm hoping to inspire folks to do in this call is to think creatively about, finding what's out there and all the different resources and how to use that to accomplish our goals. So I think I would check out the census data if you're interested in registration, but if you're looking at participation, there's a lot of turnout data out there. Folks have already collected and plotted that you can look into and see, what areas are worth investing more time into.
Absolutely. Again, start with that census data. And you have the voter precinct maps. Yes, absolutely, Linda. Someone in the chat said, odd, I believe. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing. It says, do not use Google Translate for your language translations. I absolutely agree. Google Translate is not always accurate. Again, whatever you use, if it's a digital tool, just make sure you QC it. Again, someone who speaks the language and can translate it appropriately. So thank you. That made me laugh. Okay, so question number 6, and I think this will be our last question before we close out, is there have been so many changes to state voting laws this past session in the state of West Virginia. Yes. Will changes to the laws be updated in these tools? Thank you so much for asking this question. Yes, that's exactly what we're working on right now internally, is making sure that we can provide you the most up-to-date information and resources to accurately capture the changes to any voting legislation that has passed. We are working on our state-by-state guides right now so that third-party organizations will have an up-to-date tool for going in and seeing exactly what the rules are for your state for registering voters, what information they need to provide, so on and so forth. We will do a big rollout of that so that you guys do not miss that. It will be in our e-blast, it will be on our website, but that is really important information that you guys should have. One example is there's a few states that have passed a requirement for proof with citizenship, such as New Hampshire, which means that if you're registering to vote, you have to bring your birth certificate. So we will make sure that you guys have all of that information and that you are well equipped to not only be able to register voters, but to pass on the information along to voters and to other folks that you are training. So thank you for that. I know that wasn't exactly data related, but that's a very important piece, is making sure that these resources are fully updated. Absolutely. Awesome. And I think that was our last major question. So I just want to thank you guys so much for asking those questions. Grant, thank you for dropping all of that knowledge and those tool recommendations. Again, I just want to emphasize the importance of maybe just starting from scratch and thinking about what is the problem that you're trying to solve, using the tools that are available, maybe on the free side, like Census and Google tools first before you get started. And then that will really help you understand what it is that you want to pursue in the longer run with data. So the information is there for you guys. Just make sure you do the research first and then build that into your voter engagement plan as you can tailor it year by year. So I just want to say thank you again. We are so excited that we have our 13th year of this campaign coming up. Please feel free to email us if you have any questions. Grant, I just want to thank you again for your time and your expertise in this area. It is so great to hear from you and to continue to partner with NextGen. I'm so excited to use the Vote tool and see what that is like. Thank you so much. And for those of you who have not yet signed up to become community partners for this year, please feel free to do so that you can register to receive your materials all at no cost. And we will see you on Tuesday, September 16th for National Voter Registration Day for our 13th year. Thank you all. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Bye.